While I'm continually impressed with the iPhone's Pro, the 13 Pro that I reviewed earlier this year and the 14 Pro that I'm currently reviewing, I just don't love the fact that it feels like the same phone over and over again and it doesn't bring anything new to the table. What I want is a different design, a different experience, and I'd love to eventually get to the point where Apple has foldables, but I don't think that's going to come anytime soon. Which is why earlier this year I decided to pick up an iPhone 12 mini to just give it a shot. And I was just floored. I honestly was so impressed with how great of an experience you can still get on such a tiny little screen and a tiny little phone. So much so that I ended up buying an iPhone 13 mini as well because I just love the experience so much, and this only made it better, especially with the battery life, which we'll talk about. Unfortunately, now Apple and a whole lot of other people didn't seem to agree with me, and so the iPhone mini series is going away, or so it seems. They didn't refresh it with the 14 series, and I'm probably not surprised based on sales numbers, but it's still sad to see. And I honestly think out of all their phones, the mini series was where they were actually improving the most. So now that it's gone, I'd like to take one last look at the iPhone 13 mini and just say how much I love it. This is InnoIso, and this is the iPhone 13 mini review. Just so folks know, I am generally an Android user, but I still love getting the experience to kind of step on the other side of the fence every now, once in a while. And often I'll carry an iPhone in my other pocket and a second SIM card if I want to have a great video camera, which we'll talk about pretty soon here. But just keep that in mind that I'm not an iPhone stan and I don't use iMessage. So I'm coming at this review a little bit differently than many other iPhone reviewers on YouTube. Now, my experience with the iPhone SE a couple of years ago, the iPhone SE 2020, was that yes, it was a great one-handed phone, but the screen was such a massive sacrifice since most modern apps don't scale well to that tiny little 16 by 9 aspect ratio screen. Thankfully, the iPhone 12 and 13 mini ended up being a huge improvement over that because it offered the same sort of full screen design that we've become familiar with since the iPhone X. This form factor reminded me just how great it is to have a phone that fits in your hand. And not the way that the Pixel 4a or the Galaxy S22 fits in your hand. This is a whole another level. It's tiny. It is very, very microscopic to the point where, just like that old meme from the iPhone 5 or 4, I can actually touch close to all four corners of the screen without moving my hand, which, granted, I have relatively big hands, but it's very, very nice when I'm on a walk and I need to quickly pull out my phone to text somebody, or I happen to be just carrying groceries in the other hand and I can't actually tap on the screen with my thumb. Modern phones are just not made for using your phone with one hand. And while you can sometimes scramble to get out a text message, comparatively, this phone is not made to be used with two hands. I've tried to text on this phone with two thumbs, but my thumb is like half the size of the phone, and so I often will end up hitting the wrong characters over and over again. And I'm always just better off just swiping out characters with one thumb. The iPhone 13 mini had the same sort of squared off edges and kind of flat design of its larger brethren, which typically I would say is a bad ergonomic experience with the larger iPhone models, but it's not a bad experience here considering you can actually reach your hand around and grip the phone, whereas on the larger iPhone 14 or 14 Pro, I can't do that. And so this makes a lot more sense. Now, generally, I like more curved designs where there's a more seamless curve of the back panel into the frame, but unfortunately, Apple moved away from that design several years ago. The blue color that I got on the iPhone 13 mini is still bolder than most of the iPhone 14 Pro series that we've seen this year. Now, I'm a big fan of the deep purple, which I'll talk about in my full review if I haven't already. But that being said, this blue is just primary, simple, and bold. I love it. It's all I need. This is all I need. Now, while I talk about the display, there's a metric that I want to create out of nothing, which is the 16 by 9 equivalency. What is the equivalent screen real estate if you were only given 16 by 9 aspect ratio to work with on the phone? And despite the fact that this has a larger screen real estate in terms of the diagonal, it unfortunately doesn't have a very, very large 16 by 9 equivalency when compared to some older iPhones that have 16 by 9 aspect ratio displays. I'm going to make a video deep diving into this in the future when I finally have time to navigate through all of the different screen aspect ratios. But for now, I'll just say that a lot of content, including the content you're watching right now, is built for 16 by 9 aspect ratio screens. Now we're starting to see laptops shift away from 16 by 9 into 3 by 2 or 16 by 10. And now we're seeing phones shift away from 16 by 9 into 18 by 9 or 20 by 9. The problem is there's a whole legacy of content, including things on Netflix and Hulu and everything else that are made for TVs that still use a 16 by 9 aspect ratio. And until everyone decides on whether they want to get wider or taller, that's usually the aspect ratio that most people center around. And so as a result, the actual effective size of the iPhone 13 mini is substantially smaller when watching content like this on YouTube. Now, you do get to use the extra vertical screen real estate when browsing Twitter or browsing Instagram. People don't browse Facebook all that much anymore, do they? Instagram or watching videos on TikTok, considering they're vertical videos. There is benefit that you get from the taller aspect ratio, and you can actually handle that extra screen real estate, considering taller phones are easier to use than wider phones. But honestly, I think that's one of the biggest reasons that the iPhone 13 mini series failed, in that the screen real estate when watching video content is still too small. Now, to be frank, I'm coming from the Galaxy Z Fold 4, and typically when I watch content on that, I watch it on the massive inner display. And if you compare the size of this versus the size of this, it's a very, very different experience. So this is not the type of phone that I'd be able to comfortably set up and watch content from around the room. If I'm going to watch anything on it, it's going to be sitting on a train, looking straight at it from a few inches from my face. Then otherwise, generally, the screen is going to be too small for my usage. That being said, in most cases outside of watching videos on this, I didn't find that the screen was too small. I could browse Twitter and Instagram and even TikTok and feel completely comfortable. It's only when I wanted to kind of set it and forget it that I was actually bothered by that tiny screen real estate. Now, one of the biggest criticisms of the iPhone 12 mini and eventually even the iPhone 13 mini was the poor battery life. And when I used the iPhone 12 mini, I understood it. Typically, I'd get around 3 hours of screen on time, which is about half of what I'd expect out of even smaller Android phones, like call it the Galaxy S22. That's a big downside when switching to a one-handed phone. The iPhone 13 mini, thanks to the more efficient Apple 14 Bionic, A14 Bionic chip, was substantially better at battery life. I typically got around 5 hours of screen on time, which means in a typical day, I'd take the charger off at 8 a.m. and by the time I got home at 8 or 9 p.m., I'd still have about 20% battery life remaining. Chances are it couldn't make it through the next morning. But if I was okay with charging my phone every single day, this one would be a solid make it through the day sort of performer. Which frankly was what people were used to just a few short years ago with like the iPhone X, for example. People were used to charging their phone every single night, and a lot of people still do it even though technically a lot of phones nowadays can make it a little bit longer. If you're okay with charging your phone every single night, the smaller battery on the iPhone 13 mini is not going to bother you. In terms of cameras, I came originally from the iPhone 13 Pro and a lot of high-end Android phones, so I'd expected quite a bit of step down when it came to these camera lenses. There are only 2 rather than the 3 that you get on most premium flagships nowadays, which means that there's just a standard lens and a wide angle. But both of those 12 megapixel sensors are very, very good, and pictures from this device were consistently great. I had no problems with portrait mode shots. Even night mode shots in many situations would stand up relatively well to other iPhones. I typically like photos coming from Android phones a lot more because they have a tendency to bring a lot more light out of dark scenarios and a lot more color in bright scenarios. But if you're okay with your photos looking a little bit more boring but kind of true to life, then the iPhone 13 mini takes really great photos. Now, I did miss the extra telephoto lens, ironically, just weeks into using this device because I went out to Twin Peaks towards South San Francisco and I tried to take a picture of San Francisco's downtown. And unfortunately, I just could not get a good picture because it was so far in the distance. If you just happen to be someone who typically takes photos indoors of your family, of the food you're eating, or any events that you're at, then generally the iPhone 13 mini stands up great to any sort of other flagship in the market. In terms of video quality, the iPhone 13 mini is like a video champ. The fact that you can get a great video camera in this tiny little form factor means that this is just so powerful, especially as a second phone like I've been using it as. Most of my B-roll shots taken over the last year have been taken with the iPhone 13 mini because it's the easy phone that I can have in my other pocket, not take up too much space, but still get very smooth, stabilized videos with, and it takes such great product videos. Now, since I am an Android fan, the question for me is always, why could Apple build the iPhone 13 mini and why can't other manufacturers do the same thing? Why can't other Android manufacturers build the Snapdragon Gen 1 Galaxy S22 mini, for example? And I think the reason is not only has Apple already proven that it was unsuccessful, but also Apple has a lot more margin to work with, considering they sell most of their phones for a significantly higher price. The cost of all of the materials of making a Samsung Galaxy phone usually implies a lower margin, meaning that if they were to drive the price down of a smaller model, then it'd be more difficult to be able to make any sort of profit on it. This is also the case because Samsung's Galaxy S22 series, or S series in general, have significantly lower volumes than the premium models that iPhone sells, all iPhones. iPhones are regularly the most sold models of any phones, just because Samsung has a massive amount of lower end phones that they have to sell in order to compete in terms of volume. And the ironic case is Apple didn't make it work. Now, I am skeptical for their decision to not continue the iPhone mini line. Yes, technically it was a niche product, but so is this. This is the Apple Watch Ultra. It's a $799 Apple Watch. And yes, it technically has a lot of features and functionality that the standard Apple Watch series don't. And it has a functionality that applies to divers and swimmers and long distance runners and mountain climbers. But the fact is, it's a product designed for a niche, a very, very premium product designed for a niche. And my guess is, if I had to guess, this probably will sell less than the iPhone mini series. Might not be the case. Now, if you happen to be the type that still wants a very, very small and capable phone, then the iPhone 13 mini is still sold by Apple, and it's still going to be a great option. I would love for them to continue to make them, and maybe in the future they'll make some sort of iPhone SE with the same design of the iPhone mini. But for now, this is our best option, and it's probably the best really, truly small phone on the market. I wish Android had some real competitors, but I do appreciate just how small and compact this is. Thank you for watching InnoIso. I hope you like this look back at the iPhone 13 mini. This is my favorite iPhone that I've ever used, which is truly saying something. It might be saying that I'm just not a big iPhone fan. If you like this video and you want to see more of my Apple coverage around MacBooks and iPads and a bunch of different Apple-related experiments, then you should check out these playlists here. If you want to see more in the future, let me know down in the comments and get subscribed so I can make and craft more Apple-focused content. If instead you're waiting for me to get back to Android and Windows and Surface, let me know down in the comments too, and I'll be sure to make some of those videos for you as well. Thank you for watching InnoIso. I hope you like this video, and I will catch you in the next one.